Focus on this image and its language, don't rush past it. Look at his body movement there, halfway between the car and the house, boxes in his arms, a duffel bag hanging from his shoulder, the trunk still open. Now focus on his face. That expression isn't just stress, it's not just a man in the middle of moving, his mouth is slightly open, like he's about to explain something, or like he's already rehearsed the explanation. Now look at the house behind him, the door closed, the windows still, everything looks normal, too normal. This image was taken days after Susan Cox Powell disappeared in December 2009 from her home in West Valley City, Utah. She was a mother of 2 sons. By all accounts, she had plans, she had a life, and yet, she was suddenly gone. No note, no confirmed sighting, no clear goodbye, but the evidence? The evidence would begin to circle back to the man in this picture. Study the way he stands in front of that house, as if he belongs there, and doesn't at the same time. Because before we talk about timelines, before we talk about the strange late-night trip, before we talk about what investigators found inside that home, everything begins with this image. A husband, a missing wife, and a silence that would stretch far beyond that front door. Stay with us as we proceed. Susan Cox Powell was 28 years old. A mother of 2 boys, Charlie, 4, and Braden, 2. Friends described her as careful, structured, the kind of person who planned ahead because her children depended on her. She kept lists. She saved documents. She noticed patterns. Susan lived with her family in West Valley City, Utah, a quiet suburb just outside Salt Lake City. On the surface, it was a normal life, a young family, a modest home, 2 small boys growing fast. But behind closed doors, things were coming apart. Susan was married to Josh Powell, a software engineer. Their marriage had been under strain for years. Money problems followed them closely, job instability, debt, and arguments about control and responsibility. Friends later said Susan often felt isolated, especially after moving away from her support system. By late 2009, the tension was no longer subtle. Susan had begun documenting her fears. She wrote emails. She spoke to coworkers. She confided in friends. She told them she was worried about her safety, and about what would happen to her children if something went wrong. On the night of December 6, 2009, Susan was last known to be at home with her family. It was a Sunday. The next morning, December 7th, she didn't show up for work. That alone was out of character. Susan was reliable. If she was late, she called. This time, there was nothing. When police first entered the Powell home, Susan was gone. Her purse was still there. Her shoes were still there. Her car was still parked outside. Josh Powell claimed he had taken the boys on a late-night camping trip, during a Utah winter, returning home without Susan. No one could confirm where he went. No one else saw Susan leave, but the most troubling detail didn't come from the house. It came from Susan herself. Weeks earlier, she had told friends, calmly, clearly, "If something happens to me, look at Josh." She didn't say it once, she said it to more than one person. Susan Powell didn't disappear without warning, she prepared for the possibility that she might, and that warning would echo long after she was gone. Before the disappearance. In the months leading up to December 2009, Susan Powell was quietly recording her fears. She kept journals. She wrote emails. She saved personal files. In them, she described a marriage marked by control, distance, and growing anxiety. Susan wrote about feeling watched, about arguments that ended without resolution, and about a constant sense that something wasn't right. Josh Powell, according to friends and co-workers, had become increasingly withdrawn. He guarded his phone. He locked his computer. He isolated the family from Susan's support circle. Small things stood out. Rigid routines, unexplained absences, and behavior that made people uncomfortable but was hard to define at the time. The couple attended marriage counseling. Later, counselors would say the sessions raised concerns, imbalanced power, communication breakdowns, and Susan's visible fear. She wasn't dramatic. She was precise. She spoke like someone preparing for a worst-case scenario. The night Susan vanished. On Sunday night, December 6, 2009, Susan was at home with Josh and their 2 sons. Outside, a winter storm moved across Salt Lake County. Snow fell steadily. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Josh would later tell police that around midnight, he loaded the boys into the car and went camping in the West Desert of Utah, near Simpson Springs, west of Tooele County. He claimed Susan stayed home, asleep. The story raised immediate questions: camping, after midnight, with toddlers. In freezing weather, during a snowstorm. No one else saw Susan that night, no phone calls, no messages. By morning, she was gone. Last confirmed evidence. When police entered the Powell home on December 7, the scene told a quiet but firm story. Susan's purse was still there. Her phone, her wallet, her shoes, items she never left behind, not even for short trips. There was no sign she packed a bag, no note, no indication she planned to leave her children. Officers noticed something else: the smell of cleaning chemicals. The house appeared recently wiped down. Carpets and surfaces looked freshly cleaned, especially in areas where movement would normally leave traces. There were no signs of a struggle, but also no signs of a voluntary exit. Neighbors reported hearing doors and vehicles late that night. Some recalled seeing Josh's minivan at unusual hours. Others mentioned sounds that didn't match a quiet Sunday evening. Then came the digital trail. GPS data from Josh Powell's minivan placed him far from home that night, but the timing didn't line up cleanly with his account. The route, the stops, the duration, pieces didn't settle into a clear explanation. There was no confirmed CCTV footage capturing Susan leaving the home. But movement data showed something else: travel patterns that raised more questions than answers. Josh's version stayed the same, the evidence did not, and in the space between those 2 stories, Susan Powell disappeared. Stay tuned, because something fascinating is about to be discovered. Investigation begins with the police timeline. By the afternoon of December 7, 2009, the West Valley City Police Department made a critical decision. Josh Powell was named a person of interest in his wife's disappearance. From the start, his cooperation was limited. He spoke to police, but only through an attorney. He declined follow-up interviews, he refused polygraph requests. When investigators asked direct questions about Susan's whereabouts, his answers stayed narrow, controlled, and carefully worded. Despite the mounting concerns, Josh was never formally charged. There was no body, no eyewitness. No single piece of evidence strong enough to move the case forward in court, and without that, the investigation stalled in place, visible to the public, but legally frozen. The searches continued. Law enforcement teams combed vast areas of Utah's West Desert, including regions near Simpson Springs, Topaz Mountain, and abandoned mine shafts scattered across Tooele County and Juab County. Cadaver dogs were brought in, search crews rappelled into vertical mines, some hundreds of feet deep. Volunteers joined the effort, so did Susan's family. Her parents, Judy and Chuck Cox, refused to let the case fade. They organized searches, spoke to the media, and pushed for answers. National attention followed. Susan Powell's face appeared on television screens across the country. Her name became a fixture in missing person discussions, and yet, despite years of effort, Susan's body was never found. Every search ended the same way: no trace, no confirmation, no closure. As the investigation widened, attention turned inward, toward the Powell family itself. Josh's father, Stephen Powell, inserted himself into the case in ways that unsettled investigators. He attended searches, he contacted media outlets, he maintained detailed personal writings about Susan, material that later raised serious concern. Evidence eventually revealed Stephen had an unhealthy fixation on his daughter-in-law. Investigators reviewing family computers and records found behavior that crossed clear boundaries. What had once seemed like grief or involvement now looked very different. Detectives would later say this was not just a case about one person's actions, but about what others may have known, ignored, or concealed. Information existed, warnings existed, patterns existed. But they were scattered across journals, hard drives, family dynamics, and missed moments. The danger, investigators came to believe, wasn't confined to a single individual. It was layered, protected and hidden in plain sight. Current status of the case. By the early 2010s, one fact had become unavoidable: Susan Powell's disappearance remained officially unsolved. No arrest, no trial, no confirmed location of her remains. The case sat in a painful space, open, but unable to move forward. Josh Powell was never charged in Susan's disappearance. Prosecutors in Utah repeatedly stated the same problem. The evidence suggested responsibility, but the legal threshold required more than suspicion. Without Susan's body or a direct witness, the case could not be taken to court. Then, in February 2012, the story took a devastating turn, this time in Graham, Washington, where Josh Powell had moved with his 2 sons. During a supervised visit arranged through family court, Josh committed an irreversible act that ended his own life and the lives of his children, Charlie and Braden. Authorities later confirmed the boys were victims, and that the incident occurred inside Josh's rented home. The loss was absolute. With Josh's death, the primary person of interest in Susan Powell's case was gone. Any remaining chance of a confession, cooperation, or direct accountability vanished with him. Investigators were left with evidence that could no longer speak. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, continued to push for answers. They worked with law enforcement, spoke publicly, and advocated for systemic change, hoping that what happened to their daughter might prevent future tragedies. Over time, Susan Powell's case became more than a missing person file. It became an example of what can happen when warning signs are documented, but action is delayed. The case exposed hard truths: legal systems are bound by proof, even when danger feels obvious. Intervention windows can close quietly, without alarms. And victims who plan, document, and warn are not always protected in time. Susan tried to leave a record, she tried to make herself heard, and yet, the truth she feared was never fully uncovered. Her case remains open, her story remains unfinished. And for those who followed it from the beginning, the question still lingers, not just about what happened to Susan Powell, but about how many chances were missed before it was too late. Susan Powell's case forced the country to confront an uncomfortable reality. The warning signs were there, they were written down, they were spoken out loud. Susan documented fear inside her own home, she told friends, she told co-workers, she left records that clearly pointed to who investigators should look at if she disappeared, and still, nothing happened in time. This case showed how domestic danger is often treated as a private issue until it becomes irreversible. How patterns of control, isolation, and intimidation can exist in plain sight, yet remain legally invisible. It also revealed a painful truth about the justice system: lack of evidence does not always mean lack of truth. Susan didn't vanish without context, she vanished with a history, but history, journals, and warnings don't always meet the legal standard required to step in before harm is done. Her story reinforced why documentation matters, why speaking up matters, and why listening, really listening, can be the difference between prevention and regret. Susan tried to be heard, but America heard her too late. So now, the question comes back to you watching this. Do you believe Susan Powell could still be found, or was the truth buried too deep from the beginning? What mistake do you think changed everything? And should the law have acted sooner, before the warnings became a headline? If you want real cases told with facts, not fear, subscribe to True Crime Archives. We also share tools and resources that help people understand warning signs and the psychology behind these cases. You'll find those links in the description. Be watchful, speak out, and be safe out there.